libation. Libation is just a ancient African practice that honors our ancestors, right? And you see the contemporary manifestations of libations through things like pouring out liquor for the dead homies, right? This is the way that African peoples continue on these ancient African traditions, and we may not even know why we do these things. So this is in the same breath. So what I will do is call out a name of an ancestor, and when you think about an ancestor, it could be someone who you knew intimately, a grandmother, an auntie, an uncle, whatever the case may be, or someone who walked this plane before you and gave you great inspiration, a la a Malcolm X, a James Baldwin, a Bell Hooks, someone of that pedigree as well. So I'm going to start off honoring my maternal grandmother, Ramona Jean Rogers, who I always seek for wisdom, for guidance, for clarification, for support. So I'll pour her name into pour some water into the cup and speak her name, Ramona Rogers, Ashe.
Ashe.
I'll pour Malcolm X, Ashe.
Ashe.
I'll call forth James Baldwin, Ashe.
Ashe.
And I'll call forth Octavia Butler, Ashe.
Ashe.
And I'll give a few moments for anyone else who wants to call out an ancestor or a loved one, and we'll speak their name as well.
Lena Horne.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Edna Williams.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Alvin Ailey.
Ashe.
Betty Davis.
Ashe.
Josephine Baker.
Ashe.
Jesus the Christ.
Ashe.
Lucille Whistler.
Ashe. And we'll say
all good.
Ashe. And all the greats who struggled, sacrificed, bled for our advancement, for our liberty and our justice, we say Ashe. So thank you all for that.
Ashe. Thank you, Amiri. Such a beautiful way to start it off, and I'm really grateful. So before we get into the conversation, a few housekeeping items as usual. This series, Messy Conversations, takes place almost every Monday of the academic quarter, and it's hosted by the Undergraduate Studies program in AULA, AUSB, and AU Seattle. So I wanted to mention that we're currently finalizing our conversation topics for this upcoming spring quarter and inviting guests. And so I would encourage you, if you have an idea or suggestion or you want to see something in this space, to email us at messyconversations@antioch.edu, or alternatively, reach out directly to a member of the planning committee, your local member. And if you aren't familiar with them, I'm going to shout them out now. So the planning committee is Dr. Elaine Parker-Gills in Los Angeles, David Tripp, also in Los Angeles, Anna Kwong, who's in Santa Barbara, Sarah Beth Laurie in Seattle, and the newest member and our returning champion, Clarence Williams in Los Angeles. And I also wanted to mention that we have the support of student worker Nabi Suptran, who's on the Seattle campus and is helping with some of the behind the scenes work, but has a conflicting class at this time. So her presence isn't felt as much in this space. So I mentioned this is the second to last Messy Conversations of the winter quarter, because we will be off next week for President's Day. And then the following Monday on February 21st, we're really excited and pleased to be partnering with the Black Student Union on the Antioch Seattle campus, who will be hosting a very important conversation on social justice burnout and self-care. So I hope you all will return to this same link, same space, same time on the 21st. So how this conversation works, like usual, the conversationalists will discuss this topic in a free-flowing conversation until roughly around 4:30, and then at that point we'll open it up to the other attendees for questions, comments, participation, and really, I really encourage you to take advantage of this open space and and let your voice be heard. At any point in the conversation, please post your comments and questions in the chat. You'll then be added to the queue of people who are wanting to speak, and Sarah Beth will be monitoring and moderating that space. And I believe that's all of the bureaucratic stuff to get out of the way. And so I can very pleased to introduce our invited conversationalist, Amiri Mahnzili, who graced us with that blessing. Amiri is a professor of Pan-African Studies at California State University, Los Angeles, and also currently pursuing a PhD in cultural studies with a certificate in Africana Studies at Claremont Graduate University. His research focuses on anti-modernity, indigenous African epistemologies, critical pedagogy, anti-colonial theory, and Pan-Africanism, and the study of the African diaspora. So I'm sure you've got that down, Pat. I stumble over it still. He holds a Master of Education degree focused in interdisciplinary studies from Cal State LA, and conducts rites of passage manhood training for young men ages 10 through 17 through Acoma Unity Center in San Bernardino and Teach Academy of Technology in Los Angeles. Welcome, Amiri. So happy to be in conversation with you today.
Yes, thank you for everyone who planned this. Thank you, Asa, for your invitation and your work as well.
So in order to frame this conversation, to really get into it, we're gonna first watch a short video clip actually created by Amiri that will give us a little bit of a footing. I know that the title might not be immediately evocative to a lot of you of, what is this topic? So we'll get into this video, and then Amiri, if you'll kind of break it down for us and get us into it. So just share my screen here. Sorry.
What if all this was used to shape Black futures? What if the shaping of Black futures shaped the creation of new worlds? What if these new worlds took shape in the stars, the very same stars that make up you and I? What if, to build these new worlds, we had to look back to the old ones? What if Sankofa? What if Senghor? What if Timbuktu? What if Kemet? What if Mali? What if Nubia? What if these were not simply great ancient civilizations, but pools of knowledge that can inform our present and build new worlds? What if we are all God's seed, but no more or less so than any other aspect of the universe? God's seed is all there is, all that changes. What if Earth seed is all that spreads Earth life to new Earths? What if the universe is God's seed? What if only we are Earth seed? And what if the destiny of Earth seed is to take root among the stars?
You find Earth boring, just the same old, same thing. Come on, sign up without a space, ways incorporated. If you find Earth boring, just the same old, same thing. Come on, sign up without a space, ways incorporated.
The music is different here. The vibrations are different. Not like Planet Rave. Planet Rave's sound of guns, anger, frustration. There was no one to talk to from Planet Rave to understand. We set up a colony for black people here. See what they can do on the planet all their own without any white people there. They could drink in the beauty of this planet. Would affect their vibrations, for the better, of course. Another place in the universe, up under different stars. That would be where the altered destiny would come in.
So thank y'all for kind of indulging within that for me for a moment. I do encourage though to it's a shortened version and a condensed version of the video. I do believe on the resource page that ASA had put together, it has the entire video. I would encourage you to check it out because it provides a little bit more context and makes a little bit more sense. But I think you get the essence of some of the main problematics of this notion of Afrofuturity, right, or Afrofuturism. And it's centered around this idea, or this notion of what if. And within this idea, this notion of what if is possibilities, right? And this is really what, if you get down to the core of this notion of Afrofuturity, is this idea of possibilities. And what are the possibilities? So the title, right? Afrofuturity, Astro Black Theory, and Speculative World Building. I would say Afrofuturity kind of stands alone, right? It's African people thinking about the future. And it also stands from this notion implicitly within the Western world that there are not going to be African people in the future, that Black people will not have a presence in the future, right? So Afrofuturism is a direct response and critique of this notion, right? This idea of Astro Black theory, and I'm going to provide you a definition through the work of Alondra Jones and Charles Jones, and Ronaldo Anderson in their book Afrofuturism 2.0, The Rise of Astro Blackness. And they define Astro Blackness as an Afrofuturistic concept in which a person's Black state of consciousness, released from confining and crippling slave or colonial mentality, becomes aware of the multitude of varying possibilities and probabilities within the universe, right? So this is what this idea or this notion of Astro Blackness is, right? And for me, Astro Blackness has become part of my pedagogy, right? So when I step into the classroom and I do academic work, either as a scholar myself or as an educator, I make sure I'm working through this concept of Astro Blackness, right? How can I think about Black livelihood without being restricted to colonialism or the practice of enslavement, right? So to provide some more definitions, right? So this idea, this notion of speculative world building, and I'm going to use the work of Mark Derry, Samuel Delaney, Greg Tate, who is a phenomenal social critic and Afrofuturistic critic, and Trisha Rose. And they define Afrofuturism or speculative fiction that treats African-American themes and addresses African-American concerns in the context of 20th century technoculture and, more generally, African-American signification that appropriates images of technology and prosthetically enhanced future might, for want of a better term, be called Afrofuturism. So this is the intersection, right, of speculative world building and Afrofuturism. And if you listen closely, technology becomes centered, right? And I think if you want to think about this critically, it's the way that African people think about technology and how that will move into our future, right? And just something to think about real quick, and I'll move on. But right now, a new technology that's being produced is this metaverse, right? And an Afrofuturistic project would say, how will this metaverse complicate African livelihood, right? Or how can we imagine a metaverse that is moving through an Afro-Black theoretical frame that allows for the actuation of Blackness that is not limited to enslavement or colonialism, right? So again, one thing I do want to make sure that's very understood, right? There is no unified definition of Afrofuturism. It's a very contested definition. It's a very expansive definition. And depending on who you talk to, you may get a different definition. So what I kind of want to do also is provide some of the, and I want to highlight and emphasize some of the varying definitions of Afrofuturism. So Alondra Nelson posits, right? Afrofuturism can be defined broadly as African-American voices with other stories to tell about culture, technology, and the things to come. And then also using the work of Kodwo Eshun, also working through Anderson and Jones, they offer the definition of Afrofuturism may be characterized as a program for recovering the histories of counterfutures created in a century hostile to Afro-diasporic projection, and as a space within which the critical work of manufacturing tools capable of intervention within the current political dispensation may be undertaken, right? So that's a lot of wordiness, but let's kind of just break that down, right? Part of Afrofuturism is recovering, right? Taking back how we tell our future, right? Because oftentimes, and I'll use historical example, the Berlin Conference, right? That was Africa's future being decided for without no African people on the table, right? So part of this project is to reclaim how we will determine and dictate what our future will look, feel, and sound like, right? What will be the aesthetic and the artistic expression of our future. So these are some of the main problematics, the main definitions, and again, theories that run through Afrofuturism. And to me, you could think about Afrofuturism as an artistic expression, right? Through the jazz expression, through the musical expression, through the artistic expression, through an aesthetic. It has a look to it, right? But then also for me, what becomes more fecund is this idea of Astro blackness as an academic, pedagogical, and intellectual practice, right? How could you think about making intellectual production around blackness that is not limited by their experience that was very, and you think about it, very small in the overall experiences of African people. 400 years is a drop in the bucket compared to the 8 million years that we've been on the planet, right? So it's being able to reclaim these histories and also, more importantly, reclaim how our future will be told. So I just wanted to provide those contextual analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Amiri. I'm really glad I mean, there's so much in there, and a lot of these terms, you know, it requires a lot of unpacking. But I wanted to just pick up on where you left off on this idea of history, because there has been a bit of a movement in the last few years to, you know, we're in Black History Month, or right, like February, and there's been a bit of a push to think about this. Let's call it Black Futures Month, right? Let's connect with the histories, but also be thinking forward and thinking about how the ways we tell our history impacts the future, right? So this is a major part of the way I've understood Afrofuturism, of kind of looking back at the way histories are told and thinking about time in maybe a way that goes against a more colonial standard of this very linear, you know, this event led to this event, and now we're in this exact moment, of a more circular logic of time. And, you know, one of the figures we saw in your video, considered by many, you know, one of the founding people of most important figures within Afrofuturism, Sun Ra, the great jazz musician. And, you know, he came from Saturn to Earth to cure, to heal with music and sound, and really embodied a lot of the virtues of Afrofuturism, but was, you know, he never heard the term. It was coined in 1993. So we see a bit of this, you know, there's a lot of attention on Afrofuturism in the last decade or so, but it's been around. You know, this is just because there wasn't an exact term for it. But I wanted to bring him in because he mixes, you know, this outer space, future technology, synthesizers, and, you know, I'm coming from Saturn on a spaceship with his, you know, his name is Sun Ra, and he's wearing, you know, the clothes of Egyptian deities, and much of his mythology is rooted in this kind of deeper historical understanding of the universe. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, the way Afrofuturism thinks about time and narrative.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I want to do, right, you talk about Sun Ra and his contributions to Afrofuturism. One of the things that, I don't know if it's in the clip that we've seen in the video, but he has this concept, and I believe in that movie that I pulled the clip from, which is titled "Space is the Place," he says, "I want you to think about time as officially being over." Right? Like, so how do you conceive of a world where there is no time? And or how do we problematize the notion of time, right? So in the Western world, time is linear, right? Past, present, future, right? But that does not necessarily have to be the case, right? What if I told you that time was circular, right? And so with that, I would invoke the West African Akan concept of Sankofa, right? And Sankofa is the idea of looking back to our past and bringing the information, the knowledge, the technology, and allowing that to move us through into our future, right? And this is very much an African concept, right? This is how Africans relate to time. There's no, it doesn't have to be linear, right? Like, you could travel back in time and take that past with you into your future. In fact, a lot of the work of Afrofuturism is being attentive to the past and seeing how that can impact our future. For example, I use the example of the metaverse that's being built, right? So a great example of Sankofa in intellectual practice would be, how did Facebook develop, right? What were the social shortcomings of Facebook, right? And if we're attentive to that development, you can see how some of the shortcomings that take place in Facebook are probably going to take place in the metaverse, right? Because the same people who are developing Facebook are now developing the metaverse, right? So allowing not to view time as linear opens up a very critical analysis of our society, right? And again, the reason for me, right, they say history is repeating. History is repeating because we're not being attentive to the past, right? In my interpretation, right? If we are to learn from the mistakes of the past, we won't have to continue to make those mistakes in the future or in our present, right? So again, moving away from this linear conceptualization of time allows for a lot more fecund analysis. And I'm just looking at the chat. I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up real quick on that, thinking, because I've been thinking about this, this struggle right now within education around teaching the history of America as it was, the true history, rather than this kind of very narrow mythology. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this is happening around the same time we see this backlash against voting rights, right? So that's such a concrete example of the way we understand history informs what we do in the present, right? And along those lines, I think there's so many different directions we could go in this conversation, right? Because there's this kind of higher level theory of Afrofuturism and Astro Black theory, and then there's the aesthetic and the art and the just creativity, which is a whole nother conversation, a whole nother side. But I was wondering if you could speak to like how those might interplay with each other. And I'm thinking about the role of imagination that often gets highlighted in discussions of Afrofuturism, like imagination in science, imagination in technology.
Yeah, that's a really good question, man. Because, and I'm thinking about the work of Marcus Garvey, and one of his declarations for Black people in his critique of American society and Western society was the call for our imagination not to be limited or restricted. I want you all to just kind of really rock what I just said, like listen to what I just told you, right? Marcus Garvey, his movement is largely co-aligning and coinciding with the time period of the Harlem Renaissance, right? So we're talking about the 1920s, 1910. He's calling for, as he advocates for the humanity of African people, right? He's calling for their imagination not to be limited. This is profound, right? Because limiting one's imagination is going to limit their livelihood and their opportunities, right? And their desire to achieve more than what's in front of them, right? So for him to have that foresight, to me, is really profound. And then so if you're going to stick with Marcus Garvey, right, another thing that Marcus Garvey did extremely well is the aesthetic. He was brilliant at creating this very regal aesthetic. And for those who aren't familiar, look up some images of the UNIA marches and how on point their aesthetic was, right? African people, just to call it what it is, we've always been in tune with this aesthetic. We've always been masters of presenting ourselves in a certain type of way that's just beyond normal, right? So one, for us, these very robust and dynamic aesthetics is a normative thing, right? But to get to your question more directly, Asa, this idea of the artistic expression, and I'm thinking of individuals like George Clinton, right, and his really far out aesthetic. I'm thinking of, again, Sun Ra, who's pulling his image from the Kemetic tradition, right? You may not be as familiar, but even more contemporary artists like Janelle Monáe, right? She has her own aesthetic. There's this look. And these aesthetics are tied to the imagination, right? Because each of those individuals who I mentioned, the look of them is very non-conventional, is non-traditional, right? So you have to be able to be imaginative to come up with a look that is not normal, right? Parliament Funk, like if you think about the era that they came out, right? The Detroit music is kind of coming to a close, right? The Motown sound is kind of dwindling, right? But think about the look of Motown. If we're gonna stick with the aesthetic, right? Brothers is sharp, they in the suits, they doing the two steps together, right? There's a very particular respectability politics also within that aesthetic, right? But then flash forward to P-Funk. You got cats coming out in diapers, right? All kind of colored wigs, right? There's no uniformity within the aesthetic. And then also, women become present within the band, right? So now it's not just a male-dominated space. You have women playing the horn, right? You have women taking vocal prowess there in the movement. So this aesthetic and this imagination become foundationally important, right? And then just to kind of take in with our now, right? For those who watched the Super Bowl and who was featured on that Super Bowl was the West Coast, right? West Coast music. You would not have G-Funk without P-Funk, right? All those samples that came in the early 90s from Dr. Dre himself came, by and large, George Clinton, right? And outside of George Clinton, you have to look at, from a music standpoint, Roger Troutman. And what was his intervention into the music scene? The sound that sounds technology, the music box, right? He literally talking about computer love, sounding like a computer, right? So when you talk about this idea of imagination, it's oozing out of our person, it's oozing out of our being, it's innate within keep in mind, we are the people who built the pyramids, right? So that innate level of intelligence, that innate level of brilliance is still within all of us, right? And if you don't know about the pyramids and how aligned they were with the stars, do your research, because they align directly with Orion's belt, right? Line directly with Orion's belt. So the biblical concept of creating heaven on earth, right? The concept of creating heaven on earth, the Kemetics were creating heaven on earth because they built their earth in alignment with the stars, right? So this idea of earthseed, this idea of taking root among the stars, again, going back to time not being linear, right? Octavia Butler was attuned to how the ancient Kemetics built their society. Butler knew that they were moving to the stars, right? They were attentive to the stars. So the whole religious thrust of the main character in her book, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talent, her project was to build a community among the stars, right? And again, to me, this is serendipitous because, again, you see where the past, the present, and the future get mangled up to produce, right? I hope I answered your question, Asa.
Oh, of course. Yeah, you nailed it. I could go on and on. There's so many things I want to bring in, but I do think I would love to just hear from more people, and I don't want to, hog it, even though this is so interesting to me. And I could talk about just George Clinton for, he came up with those matching suits, and then when I just listened to an interview with him where he said, you know, he saw the Beatles and he saw these other groups come in with a little bit more, okay, they're allowing a little more individuality now, and then took it to that next level of, you know, we're from outer space, actually. I'm bringing the mothership, you know, you can hop on for a ride, and adding all of this world building, which I think goes back to kind of your main thrust in framing this conversation of when you start looking at time differently, you start thinking about the way it connects to history, and then you're building new worlds out of that. Like that imagination leads not just to, you know, music and art, but new worlds, new ways of thinking about how we relate to each other, what our communities look like. And so many of the artists who are important in Afrofuturism build these really elaborate worlds. I mean, obviously Octavia Butler and within fiction, but even in music, you know, if you have a P-Funk album, like, you know, open up the gatefold and you'll see the artist Pedro Bell, who did these incredible, elaborate, like, comic books, that whole worlds about every member of the band. So I definitely could go on and on, but I want to bring in Sarah Beth if there's some questions.
Yeah, sure. I'll bring in the chat. So the first comment that we have is kind of a comment and a question. Nicole, did you want to share your thoughts here? Okay. Let's hold on that. Feel free to jump in if we miss what your point was here. But Nicole's saying, I'm confused a little. So Afrofuturism allows us to control our stories in the future societies and how we can be creators of technology and even leaders to creating those worlds. Then is Afrofuturistic movement is the examining of a future that presents a more positive, maybe through line in technology and science?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Nicole. And I seen when you initially posed it, and I want to address it, but I didn't want to kind of divert the conversation. But I think it's both, right? One, it is a critique, and I think what's important about Afrofuturism, and I think what may separate Afrofuturism from maybe science fiction, if you will, right, is it's a very staunch critique of our current times. And the process of the world building that's done within Afrofuturism is built on being attentive to the shortcomings of our current society, right? So I'm going to build this world knowing what is wrong with our current world and making sure I don't make those same mistakes in the future world, right? So it's definitely this notion of critique is centered within Afrofuturism. And I think if I can kind of expand a little bit more on the distinctions between science fiction and Afrofuturism, and I do want to preface, right, that this is a contested area, right? So my definition may be some different from some other Afrofuturists. But for me, if I were to look at what happens in science fictions and the problematics of science fictions and juxtapose them to the problematics of Afrofuturism, oftentimes what you find in science fiction is the threat, if you will, the antagonist, is a force that's outside of humanity, right? There's this alien presence that's coming to impact humanity, and humanity must defend itself against this alien force. Independence Day is a movie that comes to mind. The movie Alien itself is a movie that comes to mind. Terminator is a movie that comes to mind, right? Whereas Afrofuturism, the threat is rarely an outside force. The largest threat is humanity, right? And the real issue is the problems of what man does to man and women and child. And that's typically the core problem within Afrofuturist text. Real briefly, if I were to give an example of Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy, real quick overview, right? Humanity has been messed up by humans. I'm sorry, the earth has been messed up by humans. Aliens have to come down to save humanity. Aliens don't trust humans because of their fundamental contradiction. And this is the fundamental human contradiction. Supreme intelligence, but a hierarchical nature, right? So you want to put one group above the other group, right? So if you listen to that closely, right, the problem is not the aliens. The problem is humans' hierarchical nature, right? And they say that this vast intelligence that humans exhibit is in contradiction with the hierarchical nature of human activity. And that's always going to lead human beings to destroy Earth, right? So you need these alien species to come down and rectify this contradiction between the human species, right? So again, I bring this up to talk about the distinctions between how Afrofuturism will articulate a problem or create a problematic, right? It's an internal human conflict. And then how science fiction will articulate a problem or a problematic. It's an external factor. So Nicole, I hope I've kind of shed some light on your question. I don't know if I directly answered the question because I think it's a very complex, multi-layered question. But I think to get to the core of your question, it does both, right? It's critiquing the current world while simultaneously allowing that critique to create the new world.
I think also in her comment, she pointed out that maybe this the feeling of the separate movement or a blurred revolution is due to more of the stories being told in the mainstream media. Did you want to address that?
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to what Asa is talking about and how history is being told, right? And who's going to be able to determine the narratives of our history. And I think, one, we're in a very, if you're paying close attention, there is a very dynamic shift taking place on how artists are going about telling our stories. And there's a lot of Afrofuturistic production that are really in our contemporary. For those who are familiar with Lovecraft Country, right? I pulled a snippet of Lovecraft Country for the video that we watched in the episode of Hippolyta. That's an Afrofuturistic production, right? Elements of The Watchmen have very strong Afrofuturistic tendencies in them. You know, this is debatable. This is also contested terrain. But for those who believe that the writers of The Matrix, right, are the Wachowski brothers, I believe is what they are. But there's a myth that goes around that I kind of am inclined to believe that is originally written by a Black woman, right? And if you are to take that to be true and really look at the themes within The Matrix, there's a lot of Black and African-centered concepts within The Matrix, right? So that's also a movie that could be a ode to Afrofuturism, if you will, especially if you look at how they problematize the role of technology, right? There's even conversations that say that the Terminator series was a prequel to The Matrix, right? So essentially, for those who are familiar with the Terminator, Sarah Connor, right, is the mother who's carrying Neo, and the machines are coming to destroy Sarah Connor because they don't want her to birth Neo, right? So again, how technology can be used as a problem in the advancement of our society is a center theme for both of those films. And again, that ties back to who's telling these stories.
And just quickly, I wanted to mention maybe one of the films that brought Afrofuturism into the mainstream was Black Panther, which is, I think, also, you know, debatable, but so many of the themes of Afrofuturism are central to that film. You know, the technology, the forward-lookingness rooted in African traditions, African mysticism, and tied in with this sci-fi tech, and then the problem that causes, right? Which is the central problem of the film. Like you mentioned, it's not an external threat.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for those on that note, the comic series of Black Panther that's written by Ta-Nehisi Coates is really brilliant. And to me, that's a clearer depiction of Afrofuturism than even the film, because the comic series is really steeped in African spiritual traditions. A lot of the deities that you see within the comic series are reticent in the Yoruba tradition and the Ifa tradition. So that's definitely, I would say, for those who are into comics, right? And it's very well written because, mind you, it's written by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So that's another outlet for Afrofuturistic production that's really, really brilliant. Clarence, I think you had your hand up too. I don't know where we're at with the chat, Sarah.
Well, actually, you kind of covered what I was going to say. I mean, what resonated with me when you started talking about film was indeed Black Panther, largely because it begged the question, what if Africa had been left alone, untouched, and how it would progress into the future. And that's a central core of the film. And another thing that I thought of, and I was so happy that you framed a lot of this around the whole concept of Sankofa, because I think that all of the Afrofuturistic concepts that I've noticed and taken hold of, especially culturally through music, through film, and through writing, is the notion that, you know, we have a foundation, and that foundation is Africa. And so one must look back at that storied history in order to frame a new narrative, which is kind of what we were talking about with 1619, but we had a history before 1619 that only conscious people will pull from. And, you know, you mentioned Garvey, and Garvey's, you know, encouraging of imagination is part of that. You know, in my own writings, a lot of times I look at where we've come from in the past and how we've gotten to where we are now. And even last week when I had to ask Linda, why are we still talking about infant mortality in the 21st century for Black children and women? It's like, okay, we have a history here, people. And that history says that we were genius in the motherland. We were doing, you know, incredible things, not just with the architecture, but with science and with technology that, you know, the colonized American terminology does not lend itself to even explain, because it has been erased from any current day history. And that's what the fight is. That's why so much of our achievement as Black people, you know, it's been kind of like disguised, because we are constantly having to fight either the court system or the education system to let the truth be whole, to allow the truth to go forward. And then young people are empowered to be in that Sankofa, you know, realm, because they'll know from whence they've come, and they can see their future clearly because they've grabbed the whole of technology already.
Well said, Clarence. I think you hit the nail on the head, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, Clarence. There's a whole bunch in the chat that's relating to what you've just shared, both of you. And Monique has posted a link as well as a comment that is here. I'm sorry, it's taking me a minute to go back and forth. Nicole also added a comment, Astro Black Erica Badu theory. And maybe if they want to make any more comments about those two, either Nicole or Monique, or was that just an add-on to the conversation? I don't want to miss anything that you want to share.
I think Nicole was the mic issue she mentioned, but if she does want to speak to it. And then I saw Muhammad Islam said to speak about circular time as well.
Yeah. Okay. So one, I kind of missed the Erykah Badu thing, but one of my favorite artists off Jump. I just throw that out there off the rip. But I think also this is an individual and an artist who speaks to this circular understanding of time, right? And is very in tune with the past in order to inform her present as she plots on her future. Even her name, right? And the spelling of the name becomes important. Erykah, right? K-A-H is a Kemetic term. The ka is the shell that holds the spirit, right? Or what we may call the body, right? The ka, okay? Hence, ka-fin, okay? If you talk about etymology, right? Badu, B-A-D-U, ba is the Kemetic word for the soul, right? So even in her name is an ode to the past, right? That she's bringing into our present, because every time that we speak her name, we're speaking our ancestors, right? Ra, R-A, Ra, right? Ka, K-A, the body, right? Ba, B-A, the soul, right? So even when you enunciate her name, you're speaking to and giving honor to those who came before us, right? What another thing that Erykah Badu is very her connection with Jay Dilla, right? May he rest in peace. His birthday was a couple days ago. The drum machine, right? The drum machine, and when you talk about technology, I would argue the first technology is a human being, right, and our ability to think. But outside of that, that drum is a profound piece of technology, right? We can communicate through miles by beating that drum, right? Let you know that the invasion is on its way, right? And the drum machine, through the brilliance of those like Jay Dilla, allows you to suspend this drum pattern in time, right? Manipulate that drum pattern and produce a whole nother futuristic production, right? So not only in her naming, but how she goes about her music, right? The method within her music, and then the content itself, right? I'm thinking about her album, New America Volume 2, Return of the...
I was going to mention the names of the albums too. You can even see it there with the New America. Yeah.
Yep. The Return of the Unk. So we're bringing the Unk back, right? So definitely Erykah Badu, I think, is foundational when you talk about hip hop and Afrofuturism, and then too, just the idea of sampling as an Afrofuturistic production, right? Because typically, where are you getting those samples from? The past, jazz music, funk music, right? And you're able to give it a futuristic or a modern spin, right? And this is what made Kanye West so famous, because he could take something that sounds familiar from the 60s and give it a 2000s feel, right?
Yeah, and there's this idea that comes a little bit more out of literary theory of signifying, that you're taking some concept, some idea, and you're playing off of it. You're playing with the past as you're creating something new. And I would also just have to mention like dub coming out of Jamaica, and the way that, all of the electronic music kind of being rooted in these early 60s engineers messing around with the tapes and the records and having these big parties out on the street, and they needed new stuff for the parties, so they messed with the record, playing with it, all tied to the technology and kind of pushing it in directions that it maybe wasn't even intended for.
And to your point, Asa, right, like, and how that dub culture creates hip hop, right? Because for those who are familiar with the work of Stuart Hall, and he talks about how Jamaicans were migrating to Europe and to Britain in particular, right? That migration also stopped off in the Bronx, New York, right? And that dub culture of setting up the DJ with these loudspeakers.
KRS-One, like Melly Mel, they were all...
That's it. And that's it. That's the impetus of hip hop. And those cats who you mentioned, a lot of them have Jamaican ties, right? A lot of them is Jamaican cats, right? Busta Rhymes, Jamaican.
Yeah.
Biggie, Jamaican, right? So this, yes, is a very, very good call out. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mitch has made some comments that relate also to this. And Mitch, are you ready to ask your questions?
I am. You spoke about the distinction between sci-fi and Afrofuturism, and I'm wondering, is the concept of genre itself a form of segregation? How do we avoid the idea of separate but equal canons that obviously are not equity, and eliminating the hierarchies of literary being seen as more intellectual than fantasy or horror or sci-fi going into the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think how you classify genre as a form of segregation, I would agree with that, and I think a lot of, if you look at a lot of interviews of these Afrofuturistic artists, that's a part of their struggle, right? And that's part of the tension that played within the production of this Afrofuturistic text, and a lot of them who say that, I'm just here to create stories. And then these stories get classified into sci-fi or Afrofuturism or whatever the case may be. Oftentimes, that's for marketing, right? So this is the science fiction audience that you can write to, right? This is the Afrofuturist audience. So I see where you're going with this articulation. And again, I think this kind of ties back to some of Nicole's comments, and where who is controlling the story, right? Like who is going to be able to determine what is what. And I think if we had, and when I say we, I mean African people, if we had more of a control of our narratives and our stories, these genres and these classifications wouldn't be as important, right? Because if you just put out whatever the work is, and there it becomes. For example, I think this could tie, from a network TV perspective, there's a show called Grand Crew, right? I don't know how many you're familiar, but what to me is very profound about the show, it just shows Black people in a very quotidian, everyday experience, right? And it's not about them constantly fighting oppression or constantly dealing with the tropes of Blackness. It's just showing Black people as they are. And I think once you get to that point where you're telling your own stories, you could tell those type of stories without all the baggage that comes with, per se, genres, that comes with these tropes and that comes with these stereotypes. You could just talk about the Black quotidian. And to me, that's a lot more interesting.
And Nicole has mentioned in the chat, I see, and I wanted to bring that in for sure, that, you know, Octavia Butler, who we've mentioned a few times, really faced this head on in her career, publishing, you know, as a sci-fi writer. I saw a photo of her at a sci-fi convention in like the early 90s. And it's just, I mean, it's 30 white men and her. And you know, with the publishers, she had to struggle. How do you classify this? It's almost like the musicians in the 60s, right? Where they would say, okay, this is Black music. You know, this goes on Black radio. And it was really hard to break over and bust in. And those genres, you know, especially sci-fi, has that legacy and that tradition. But at the same time, there are ways in which traditional sci-fi was pushing boundaries. Like,
Yes.
A lot of Afrofuturist artists and scholars cite Star Trek, seeing a Black woman in space in the 60s, being really profound. Yeah. You know, and then there, you know, a Black captain in the 90s. So I don't think it's, you know, quite as clear a division there. There's definitely elements within those genres. But thank you, Nicole, for bringing that in.
I agree. And then just on Octavia Butler for a moment, man, like I don't think people don't give her enough credit. And especially if you look at those parable books, and it's supposed to have been a third one. And I just think, from what I understand, it depressed her trying to come up with the storylines in this world building. But just to kind of provide a context, and Asa, correct me if I'm wrong on the dates, but I believe the first book was produced, I want to say, in the late 80s. And then the second one was in the early to mid 90s, okay? This is when she wrote the books. The time that she's talking about is the 2025 to 2045 or 2055. Am I correct on that, Asa? Okay.
I think that's right, yeah.
So just keep in mind this temporal leap, okay? We're talking about somebody writing a book in the 80s, in the early 90s, talking about 2025 into 2050, right? Which is very much our very near future. And I'm gonna tie this back to Muhammad's comment around the circular understanding of time, okay? This is something that I always talk about with the book. The book is an example of how to problematize time, okay? Because not only within the text, you have these great temporal leaps. So she may do a flashback from 5 years ago, right? The book is written about a time in the future, right? But we're reading this book in our present, right? So these are the, how she's able to problematize and blend this linear notion of time, not only within the book itself, but how she writes the book, right? It's very nonlinear. But to me, what's more profound is how accurate she is in the book. So for me, typically what I do, my practice during when school's in, right, from fall to spring, I'm reading for my academic advancement, right? But summertime is when I kind of do my leisure work. And for the past 3 years, my summertime reading has been Afrofuturism. I believe 2 years ago, I picked up the parable text, and it would be times where I would read it, and literally it would be so uncanny that hair would stand up on my arms. Like I would get the chills because she's talking about something that's going on right now. And I want you all to think about what their 2020 was like, and all the social turmoil that we were going through in 2020, right? Just to kind of show you how on point she was. There is a Republican right-wing leader named by the name of Jared that's coming into power at the time of the novel, right? And his slogan is to make America great again. Think about that, reading that in 2020 about a book written in 1980 something, right? How does she have the wherewithal? What was her imaginative process to low-key predict the future, right? Within the text, they talk about this occurrence called the pox. This is what they call it, the pox, and it's short for the apocalypse, right? And as you move through the novel, you find out what initiates the pox is a disease that's global, that wrecks humanity, and global warming, right? On top of social stratification, right? What are we literally going through right now? A disease, hyper social stratification, and it's February and it's 90 degrees outside. Make that make sense, right? So her ability to read our future by being attentive to our past and her ability to build this speculative world is very profound. So
I think there's a reason that that book written in 1994 or written earlier, published in 94, hit the bestseller list for the first time in 2020, right? People are started to recognize, people have been reading it for a long time, but it was really, it's kind of undeniable at this point.
Yeah, sure.
I think you've hit everything in the chat, and I see that it's almost 5 o'clock, so we need to say goodbye to our friends who need to go now, and the rest of us can stay on for a little bit here and have another conversation or a riff off this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for all my students who tapped in. I see a few of y'all, so I appreciate you who attended.
Yeah, thank you all for coming by. We got him.
See, this is Baba Pierre.
Okay, so do we want Pierre? Do you want to talk about what you wrote?
You're still on mute, Baba Pierre. If you want, Baba, I could just address the question if you prefer. Okay, I see David Tripp's question, but I'm going to speak to.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Baba. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, I understand you. What do you say?
I think you bring up some good points, Baba, and that's one of the points of the conversation I didn't really get to is the centrality of Africa in Afrofuturism. And for me, right, and I'm sure for those who don't know, Baba Pierre is in my class at Cerritos. So you're familiar with the conversation that I have around Pan-Africanism. But I don't separate Afrofuturism from Pan-Africanism, right? And as central as Africa is to Pan-Africanism, is just as central to Afrofuturism for me, right? And I don't think, and just let's be very practical, right? Let's just be very practical. The way that our current world is constructed, right? You cannot have our modern world without Africa. And I cannot conceive of a future world without Africa, right? So not even from an Afrofuturistic paradigm does Africa become foundational, but just from a very practical material paradigm, Africa becomes foundational, right? And again, to kind of think about this circular notion of time, right? How profound is it for the first people on this planet to have a very concentrated and concerted effort on how the future of this planet will look, right? And for me, these are some of the intersections and connections, and again, most importantly, the centrality of Africa to this concept of Afrofuturism. But one thing I will say that is also, from what I found doing my research, very contested territory, right? Nnedi Okorafor is a really popular Afrofuturistic writer. She came up with the term African futurism because as a she's born here in the States, but she's a descendant, her lineage is traced back to Nigeria. And she caught a lot of hot water for her TED Talk by claiming Afrofuturism as a Pan-African project, right? And so, which prompted her to come up with this term, African futurism. But to me, I don't see the separation. I view Afrofuturism as a Pan-African project, right? Including all of diaspora. And if you think about it, the diaspora as a whole has contributed to Pan-Africanism. Randomly enough, W.E.B. Du Bois has an Afrofuturistic essay. I believe it's called The Comet, right? And this meditation on a comet coming to strike New York and how New York will recover from this comet, right? And if you know Du Bois's history, he is one of the premier figures of Pan-Africanism. And not many people know that he does Afrofuturistic production. So to me, I don't separate the two. I don't think you can separate the two.
I've also seen Du Bois mentioned in Afrofuturist talk around his infographics, which
Yes.
were,
Yes.
you know, these profound technological statements embracing kind of scientific statistical evidence, but doing it in this beautiful aesthetic that, you know, was for the World Fair too. And, you know, it kind of blew people away, this mixing of the science and the aesthetics and looking at the future and looking at the current state of the United States.
I would like, if possible, to discuss the question around Afro-pessimism and Afrofuturism. And I think it's a really good question. And part of what put me on the path of Afrofuturism was Afro-pessimism. I didn't, like, I was always into Afrofuturism without even knowing it, right? And I didn't know it was a name for it. But as I started to see what the work of Afro-pessimism was doing, I was like, so what is the counter or critique, if you will, of Afro-pessimism? One of my colleagues, and I believe y'all should be familiar with him, Dr. G, Tavanga Gregory from Cal State LA. He did our Pan-African conversation, right? He produced this idea of Afro-triumphalism, right, as a response to Afro-pessimism. But to directly answer the question, right, for me, Afro-pessimism is very much grounded in our current reality and grounded in our historical reality from a very specified lens, right? It's this idea that the purpose for the Black body in our Western world is service of whiteness, right? Is servitude. This idea that Sexton makes popular of social death, a perpetual social death, right? So it kind of encapsulates and limits the Black experience within this concept or this understanding of social death. Whereas Afrofuturism, right, is very much about the possibilities for what could be, right? It's the direct opposite of social death. And if you have a chance to go back and watch the video that we shared at the front of the show, of the conversation, where it starts off is actually the middle, right? Because what I do is like an interlude, what I call an ode to Black joy. And what this ode is two young people who were murdered. And you don't know why they're killed or why they're dead, excuse me. But they come out of the coffin, right? And they're dancing, right? And to me, that is the response and the critique to Afro-pessimism, right? Because again, if Afro-pessimism is about the perpetual death of the Black body, what more is a middle finger to that concept than Black bodies getting out of a coffin and dancing, right? And exhibiting these profound levels of joy, right? And to me, that's the work that Afrofuturism could do, is through this notion of Astro Blackness, right? Imagine a joyful experience of Black livelihood that has nothing to do with enslavement or colonialism and things of that nature. So to me, Afrofuturism is the direct response to Afro-pessimism. But what I've learned and what I'm training my mind to do as an intellectual is to think about the dialectics between Afro-pessimism and Afrofuturism, opposed to just separating them. Like, how can we bring these two theories in conversation and what can be produced from that platform. So that's kind of more so where I'm trying to get my mind to work towards. But I think your question is spot on in understanding those distinctions.
Can I follow up, Amiri?
Please.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and it's interesting how different liberatory movements wrestle with futurism and pessimism. So there's a similar conversation going on in queer communities over the past couple of decades, for instance. So, it's often the pessimism is seen as sort of the ultimate negation of the system of oppression. So give me 1 second to make a connection there. So, I think back to Malcolm and X, right? So, and so what's X, right? If it's not, a sort of ultimate negation, and not a return so much to roots as an opening up a possibility. So all that leads me to my question of, from where you sit with this, with Afrofuturism, do you see it sort of reinscribing a kind of liberal particular identity? Or is it opening up a possibility for a new universalism that would just finally put to rest the corrupt universalism of whiteness?
I think the latter. I would argue towards the latter, right? And even if I were to read back the definition of Astro blackness, right? An Afrofuturistic concept in which a person's black state of consciousness released from confining and crippling slave or colonial mentality becomes aware of the multitude of varying possibilities and probabilities within the universe, right? And to me, when you start thinking about this universe, it's much more expansive than the westernized modernity concept, right? Even if you are to look into what Said calls the Orient, right? It's even larger than that, right? This is talking about beyond even the earth as we know it, right? So to me, this universality, I even think that they're imagining this different from how we may even be thinking about universality, right? And I think the potentiality of even opening up to that space, right? And I think you're spot on again with that X, because they also say X representing the unknown.
Yeah.
And how much possibilities in the unknown. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Amiri.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add something onto that? I just always want to bring in the musicians, because I'm thinking about a lot, or a lot of Afrofuturist artists who, as opposed to like sci-fi, where we're the humans and the aliens are coming to us, like you mentioned, Amiri, like I'm the alien. that's the idea of Afrofuturism. Like Sun Ra, like I come from Saturn, actually. That's my biography, right? Outcasts, like yes. ATLians, right? Like we're from outer space. P-Funk coming down on the mothership. And this, I think, relates to the identity idea too, right? It's like if you are already an other in this culture, then okay, I'm other. I'm from outer space. I'm the X. Like
yes.
It's not within your categories.
Yo, Asa, thank you, man, because to me, right, when I was talking about how do you bring Afro-pessimism and Afrofuturity into conversation with one another, that's it right there, right? This idea of us, I'm alienated, so I'm going to just become alien, right? And it makes me think of Fanon's work. It makes me think of Richard Wright's work, where they talk about that alienation, they talk about that othering, right? And to use, the language of your Sexton and use the language of Wilderson, the negation, right? I'm gonna just sit in this negation so much so that, okay, I'm a non-being, I'm not human, I bet. I'm so non-human, homie, I'm extraterrestrial, right? And to me, that's where you can bring these two theories together and it becomes a very fecund playground for intellectual production, yeah.
I loved hearing George Clinton talk about, I just watched this interview with him and he talked about how, they couldn't make really angry music about, we're gonna kill this music exec, but he was like, we could be other, and I could create the bop gun and say, if I hit you with this bop gun, you have to dance. And it's like, that's the kind of imagination that's like, it's so other, you're gonna dance with us, like.
And then too, Asa, like that makes me think of the subversiveness, right? And there's also this idea of fugitivity that's very central to just the African experience, right? Always being in constant flight. And because you're always in constant flight, you have to be able to outthink and outsmart your captures, right? And being able to disguise the assassination gun as the pop gun is part of that subversion, right? So even the oppressor is bobbing their head to the music, not even knowing they're singing to their demise, right? And to me, when you talk about this imagination and this brilliance, yo, that's it, right? And then it becomes imaginatory liberation, right? Like, how do you imagine more dynamic ways of liberating your mind, your soul, and your body, right? So, a very good call out.
I just want to also say that today Nicole is putting so much in chat that is wonderful, and the people who weren't here today with us are going to miss all this. So I want to go back a little bit and share some of what she's saying. The last piece here, in the spirit of Afrofuturism, it seems only logical they would be the same, Pan-Africanism. And then she referred to Watchmen as a perfect example of what that looks like in another future. Also, another world in another way, but it's not limited to one world only. That's the great thing about world building stories, is you can explore wild concepts, as many as the reader can take.
Yeah.
So I thank you, Nicole, for those beautiful pieces. Did you want to make any comment? Also, for those of you who are watching this video, Christine Ford asked for a playlist, which Asa says is there. So we've got some great musical references today that you might want to follow up on.
Yeah, a lot of them are in that LibGuide link, and I'm going to go back through, and anything that was mentioned that isn't on there, I'll add. So
thank you, Asa.
On the music tip, don't know how many are familiar. I'm a West Coast hip hop head, right? So Quasimodo or Madlib from the Stone Store Records. That to me is another example of Afrofuturism. Very much. So one, Otis Jackson Jr., who is Madlib, is the son of a jazz musician, right? He takes a lot of, yes, MF Doom, absolutely. He takes a lot of sampling and just production methodology from Sun Ra, right? And he has this in homage to P-Funk, right? How you have all these separate characters within the band and all these separate what do you call them, caricatures, if you will. Madlib has this individual named Quasimodo, right? And Quasimodo, one of his albums is actually called, one of his songs is called Astro Black, right? And you all know Astro Black from Astro Black Theory, which I've been talking about. So these implicit little subtle nods to, again, the history, the present, and the future are all influenced through the music production, the artistic production, the literary production, right? And again, this notion of music being a time machine, or this music being a conduit for time travel. We mentioned Sun Ra quite a bit, and one of his premiere films was Space is the Place, right? And the premise of the film is this alien creature comes down to, I believe, Oakland, right? And he wants to transport African people to this land or this planet, where you see at the end of the video that I showed, right? At the beginning of our conversation. And how he will do that is through music, right? The vibrations will teleport and transport people from Earth to this free and liberated Astro Black space that Sun Ra has carved out for us in the outer destiny, right? So to me, I think Sun Ra is a perfect embodiment of all the things that we talk about as it pertains to Afrofuturism in one person.
Thank you. I also see here Jacqueline made a shout out to a professor, Justin Cole, who covered the music of Afrofuturism in class, I'm assuming. Jacqueline, did you want to say anything?
I have to go now. I was just getting ready to say I got another meeting, but I'm so glad that this conversation took place today. It's good to see you, Amiri. Of course, Asa was on it with the music and just threw everybody at it. It was awesome. And I was just quiet because I knew I'd be overly excited and jumping around like this. So thank you for today, and I gotta go, and everybody take care.
Thank you, Jacqueline. It's
Hi,
always good to see
Jacqueline.
you.
Thank you. There was also a request to add the video, if you would, Asa, if you saw that.
I just dropped it in there, the direct YouTube link, and then it is also on the LibGuide.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, thoughts?
I've been looking forward to this all quarter long, and it's you guys just knocked it out of the park, and just great to have this celebratory, mid-month celebratory consideration of the possibilities, an expansion of the horizons of possibility, and much needed for many of us, I think. So really appreciate you too.
Definitely. You're welcome. Most certainly welcome.
Thank you, David. Yeah. I did want to mention, I mentioned her name in the libations, but Betty Davis, who, not the old actress, but Miles Davis's wife at one point, Betty Davis, who I think actually is a major figure in Afrofuturism, but maybe looked over a bit, but died a few days ago. Oh. And so I want to mention her. And, if you look at Miles Davis's career, he was still wearing the button-up shirts and being the cool guy until he met Betty Davis. And then he started, bringing in synthesizers. And, she named the album Bitches Brew. It was Witch's Brew till Betty.
Yeah, Witch's Brew.
Named it.
Yeah, and I think too, you talk about an aesthetic, right? Like she is a personification of an aesthetic, like the Afro, we're just so very, very good call out, Asa. Thank you.
And she was Cicely stand-in, is that what you're telling us?
He was pre, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Amiri. Yeah, I could talk to you, but I could go late into the night talking about this, but I'm so appreciative for your knowledge. And,
if it's okay, something that I'll always do, just as we started in a proper order, in a proper fashion. So I typically do it in my Cerritos class because I know Baba Pierre's position. I don't want to put you on the spot, Baba Pierre, or put your information out there, but correct me if I'm wrong. You said you're 77, correct? Baba Pierre?
What?
You said
what
you're 77 years old, Baba?
Yes.
So what I always do, just to kind of keep it in the appropriate spiritual orders, I ask his permission before we close out. Because he's by far the eldest person in my class space. I don't know, and I ain't trying to put nobody on blast, but if there's anybody that's older than Baba Pierre, I just want to ask for your permission to close this out. And if not, then Baba Pierre, is it okay that we close things out?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. All right, y'all. Peace.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.